Inside today's episode, we're going to be talking about 5 food ingredients that are banned in the EU that actually still exist in foods in the United States.
What's up and welcome to Sam Miller Science, where you're joining me just over a decade into my personal journey of working to bridge the gap between metabolism, macros, muscle, and medicine, all while helping coaches scale the impact that they desire and deserve. If you are here, thank you so much for listening and for trusting me to help you elevate your coaching game or to lead you in your transformation to realize your true potential. In either case, each week I'll be sharing my methods, models, and message to serve as leverage for your specific goals. Without further ado, let's get on to today's show.
Now, you might be wondering, how are these foods still sneaking their way into the grocery store on American shelves when in many other countries beyond just the European Union, potentially in Australia or UK, these food additives or ingredients are completely banned? Now, running through the list today, we have food dyes, red 40, yellow 5, and yellow 6. We're also going to talk about BVO, which is Brominated Vegetable Oil, titanium dioxide, which is a common ingredient that's kind of a filler ingredient, but it's also used in the supplement industry quite frequently. We have ADA, which is currently used as a dough conditioner, and we're also going to talk about ractopamine. Now, in these 5 food additives, there's various reasons why they're sneaking into the foods, and first we have to talk about and consider, what is the difference between the EU food regulations and what's going on in the US? Now, the EU's equivalent of the Food and Drug Administration is known as the EFSA, and they have more of a precautionary stance on food additives, meaning if there's kind of a shadow of a doubt, they're probably not going to include it. They have a lot less tolerance to any doubt in the data. The additive process in the US is decentralized and it's fairly convoluted, whereas everything in the EU kind of comes to this centralized channel. There's different ways that substances can make their way into food products in the US. Some require Food and Drug Administration approval, while others do not. There's kind of a workaround, and it's something called GRAS. And so GRAS designation means it's generally recognized as safe. Now, the problem is this isn't just based off research. This is a panel of experts that can kind of backdoor approve certain additives or ingredients through these panels. And that way these foods are continuously added into packaged foods on our shelves. Now, if they do it under this designation, it does not require FDA approval, but the company can voluntarily submit to the FDA afterwards. Even when the FDA does approve additives themselves, they often use science that is very limited in terms of time horizon. So anytime we have research, we're always looking at things like the sample size, right? So is this, a lot of humans that we're looking at, or a very small group where it's only 1 or 2 people or something like that? And then we want to look at the duration of the study, because if people are consuming these food ingredients for years and years and years across their lifetime, we really need to have an idea of what are the potential implications from consuming these foods over that longer time horizon. In the EU, when you're looking in the European Union, everything has to be approved pre-market by one centralized body. They're a lot more, they're kind of precautionary and stay on the conservative side of the research. So they like to see it play out in research as safe before they approve it. Whereas in the United States, sometimes things are just generally recognized as safe by this panel. There's not necessarily research substantiating that in all cases. And so things are kind of making their way into our food system. So the first thing is going to be food dyes, red 40, yellow 5, and yellow 6. These 3 dyes make up about 90% of the dyes used in foods, and there's now considerable human evidence that's basically supporting that these things could be causing some issues. So the dyes themselves are classified as probable carcinogens, but one of the bigger problems is actually that they're commonly contaminated with something called benzidine. Now, benzidine would be something they'd more come into contact with. Remember, with food additives and ingredients, you have to think about the facility that something is processed in, the transport process, how are these things handled, and then they're basically making their way into various packaged foods. So the dyes themselves, we do have some question around the dyes, but it's also, they're frequently contaminated with something that could potentially be as bad or worse, and that's something called benzidine, which is a known carcinogen. In addition to that, we have some solid human data that these dyes are linked to ADHD and general attention issues and hyperactivity in children. They are also known to cause hypersensitivity reactions. So there's a study on 52 patients who were basically experiencing some GI symptoms. They had, they also had hives and severe edema. They were put on a 3-week elimination diet free from all dyes and additives, and their symptoms resolved. They were then treated with 1 or 10 milligrams of red 40, and a large proportion of these individuals had their symptoms come back. So now hives and severe edema, sometimes these skin-related concerns like hives, for example, or when people have have histamine reactions, it can be centered in terms of what's going on in the gut. Now, this particular study wasn't necessarily looking solely at GI health, really monitoring more so the hives and edema. So I had more of a GI interpretation there, but understand that specifically what the researchers were looking at is more in regards to the hives and the edema. And what happened was when they treated them with 1 or 10 milligrams of Red 40, large proportion of those people had the edema or hives come back. There's also evidence that these particular ingredients, the various dyes that we're talking about, are genotoxic, meaning they may be able to damage our genes. Eating mostly whole foods is going to be the trick here if you want to avoid food dyes. And you can also pick products. So for example, let's say you're supplementing with electrolytes, or you like to have the occasional lower calorie beverage. There are brands that will make these things without the food dyes added to it. So you really just need to look at the back of the food label and you'll be okay there. So like Zevia is a great soda brand that doesn't use any coloring. There are electrolytes like Element, for example, doesn't necessarily include any food dyes there either. So it doesn't mean that you can't ever have flavoring. It just means we don't necessarily want the dyes associated with that because of the, occasional contamination and just the fact that we're not 100% certain on the long-term safety of a higher consumption of dyes over time. The next ingredient is going to be Brominated Vegetable Oil, or BVO. This was originally patented as a flame retardant and is now used as an emulsifier in some sodas and sports drinks. Most soft drink companies did get rid of this ingredient around 2015, but there are some off-brand or like kind of off-label uses for it, and you will see it in some store brand soft drinks. So instead of the major brands like Pepsi and Coke, maybe if someone's making kind of the store version or like a discounted version of that particular drink, you may still find brominated vegetable oil in there. If you listen to my episode addressing bromide and thyroid health, the same principle applies with BVO. So if you haven't checked that one out, you should be able to find it in the podcast feed and also on the YouTube channel as well. A study published in the FDA basically in 2022. So the Food and Drug Administration basically looked at this, that when giving mice the equivalent amount of BVO that a human would get from 2 to 3 soft drinks, it posed dangers to thyroid health. So overall, definitely not something that we want to do for optimal health, and coming into contact with this regularly could be problematic. Another thing to consider, apart from the thyroid connection, BVO has also been linked to memory loss. So we're now seeing multiple ingredients. So whether it was the food dyes related to ADHD concerns or BVO being linked to memory loss, both of these things are problematic from a cognitive health perspective. Our next ingredient is going to be titanium dioxide, which you'll frequently see in press tabs, different supplements. It's used in creamer formulations, subpar quality fish, and I'd say also you may see it in some candies. It makes capsules and press tabs whiter and more pleasing to look at, as well as filling extra space. It's classified as a probable carcinogen when you inhale it, but research shows it may have negative effects as well when you ingest it. And this may be on the reproductive system, which we always want to be concerned about that. And many in vitro studies show a potential cell toxic nature, and animal studies show stomach and intestine inflammation, liver toxicity, kidney toxicity, and increasing anxiety. Many quality supplement brands leave this additive out, so you will want to look at your supplements, make sure you're not consuming titanium dioxide, but it's always going to be listed on the label, so when in doubt, read the label. The next ingredient we have is ADA. So currently banned in the EU, UK, and Australia. ADA is basically a dough conditioner that's used in heavily processed breads. More than 400 store-bought products include ADA as of 2020. The problem with ADA seems to be what it's broken down into when you're actually baking with the ingredient. So it may not be just ADA by itself, but what happens when you bake it or you're using high temperatures, and that is SEM and urethane is classified as a carcinogen. So it's, okay, what's happening? When we're basically baking or we're cooking at a higher temperature, this ADA is breaking down into urethane, and urethane may be what's posing more of the problems. While some additives do not appear on the label, ADA does. So if you or your clients happen to consume any packaged bread products, check the back of the label for this ingredient. This could also be an example where if someone's struggling with bread in the US, but then they're going and traveling and they're not having any issues consuming bread or having no negative reactions, this is another reason we might potentially be experiencing some of those symptoms in the United States. This one's a little bit easier to avoid, so compared to some of the other things we may be coming in contact with, just keep an eye out for it. The fifth one is going to be ractopamine. Now, if you need another reason to avoid cheap, conventionally raised beef and pork, ractopamine may be one. This is a B2 androgenic agonist, and it's used as a feed additive for cattle and pigs to increase leanness and improve feed efficiency, meaning they gain more muscle on less calories. Interestingly, clenbuterol, which used to be used for this purpose a really long time ago, bodybuilders who listen to this may actually recognize what clen is. It's frequently used in contest preps, or at least it was more popular in the 90s and 2000s. But the use of clen in livestock was outlawed due to some serious adverse events that occurred in humans. Ractopamine is banned in more than 120 countries, but is still widely used in the US today. This is going to be in lower quality beef and pork products. It's not going to be in your organic, grass-fed, or pasture-raised beef and cattle. In vitro studies show that this chemical may be genotoxic, and animal studies also show it may disrupt muscle function and homeostasis, as well as increase your cardiovascular disease risk. While this chemical typically builds up in the organs of cows and pigs, some of it will still make it into the muscle meat. So most sustainable farms won't be using this additive. So one more reason to spring for that higher quality meat whenever you have the opportunity to do so. Now, that's pretty much it for today. There are certainly other ingredients that we could talk about, but wanted to focus on these 5 and how there's a significant difference between the United States and what's going on in the EU, UK, and potentially even Australia. Now, you can protect yourself by simply reading your food labels, reading your ingredients, and keeping an eye out on these things. Now, you might be wondering, well, I track my overall calorie intake, monitor my macros, or I eat healthy, quote unquote. This is just an important reason to still have the bulk of your diet made up of single ingredient whole foods, and making sure we're getting adequate protein, micronutrients, antioxidants. And there are going to be, situations where we learn more about these ingredients or additives over time. Some cases, out of the 5 things we mentioned, we have human data. Some of the others, it's based off of animal data or what we've seen in terms of anecdotal differences when people are traveling to the EU, UK, Australia, consuming foods, and then contrast that with what's going on in the States. I've certainly seen this as far as my clients who are traveling abroad, or maybe they go to Europe over the summer. They're consuming foods that they'd never be able to consume in the United States with less side effects or symptoms, or really not much of a negative outcome whatsoever, whereas consuming the same types of foods in the United States may leave them bloated, feeling distended, or just overall not tolerating them very well. Some people also experience things like fatigue or brain fog when consuming certain packaged foods. So that's going to be pretty much it for today. If you are consuming single ingredient whole foods and you're opting for better quality meats, if you do go for pork, there's something called heritage pork, which could be an option for you. Higher quality supplements are typically going to exclude titanium dioxide, and that's going to get you at least moving away from the bulk of the food additives that we talked about today, and you're probably going to be doing okay with things. I never want these episodes to sound like I'm fear-mongering or that there's this massive problem and that everybody's going to have some sort of health issue, but you can protect yourself simply by being aware. And my goal here with this platform is to educate, create awareness, and allow you guys to make the best possible decisions relative to whatever your goals are and whatever your needs are when it comes to your health, so you can optimize that and live your best life possible. If you're a health and fitness professional, it just may be a matter of educating your clients on these deeper aspects of nutrition and going beyond the surface of just, basic nutritional adjustments and really helping people feel better. Now, if you have clients with digestive health concerns, this stuff is going to be paramount, right? It's going to be more than just macronutrients and a fiber count. We need to understand how what's in our food impacts our digestion and our absorption, and subsequently our biofeedback, quality of life, internal health markers, and a lot of things that I talk about on this platform. If you enjoyed today's show and you found it valuable, please consider sharing it with a friend or dropping a 5-star rating and review on audio. If you're watching on video, please give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. A lot of you guys have tuned in or watched an episode or two, or you're watching the videos consistently, but you may not be subscribed, so make sure you're subscribed. That way you get notifications about the new content. If you are listening on audio, we're very fortunate to have over 1 million unique downloads, and I'd love for our ratings and reviews to better reflect some of the binge listening that you guys will do once you find shows and topics that you're interested in and that you like on my platforms. If you want to check out the audio, that's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We have been cranking out those YouTube videos as well on the channel, and that's at Sam Miller Science on YouTube. I appreciate you guys listening today and spending some time with me. I will talk to you in the next episode.